Let's kick off this explainer by looking at one of history's ultimate paradoxes. We're going to unpack exactly how Rome grew from a tiny, muddy village on the Tiber River into a massive, globe-spanning superpower, and how that exact success ended up completely destroying its own government. We'll trace the foundations of Roman power and see why a system designed with perfect checks and balances ultimately became, well, totally impossible to control. So the big question we're answering today is this. How did a small village conquer the world only to basically conquer itself? We're diving into a massive 700-year domino effect. This is really a story about the ultimate price of success and how rapid, relentless expansion broke the very political machine that made it all possible in the first place. We've got a lot of ground to cover today, so here's our roadmap. We'll be moving chronologically, starting from myth to monarchy, building the Republic, conquering the Mediterranean, the Republic cracking under pressure, Caesar and civil war, and finally, the rise of the first emperor.
Part 1. From Myth to Monarchy.
Our story officially kicks off in the 8th century BCE. According to legend, Rome was founded in 753 BCE by Romulus, who was supposedly the mythical son of the war god Mars. Early on, Rome wasn't a republic. It was actually ruled by a series of kings, 7 of them in fact. These early kings and their advisors formed the initial blueprint of what would eventually become the famous Roman Senate. But here's the thing. After about 2 centuries, the Romans grew to absolutely despise this system. They hated the idea of concentrating all that power in a single man's hands. The tension finally boiled over in 509 BCE, when the patrician aristocrats violently expelled their 7th and final king, a guy named Tarquin the Proud.
Part 2. Building the Republic.
Having literally just ousted a tyrant, Rome found itself at a major crossroads. They needed a totally new blueprint, so they created this res publica, which translates to the public thing. It was a republic meant to balance power and actually represent the citizens. Above all else, they were terrified of one man ever holding absolute power again. Now, to be clear, this was definitely not a true democracy right out of the gate. Initially, it functioned more like an elective oligarchy. Only the wealthy patrician families, the closed elite, held the real influence. The commoners, known as the plebeians, well, they had to fight tooth and nail for political equality over the centuries that followed. To make absolutely sure they never had another king, they strictly divided power. Think of it as a strict anti-king playbook. Instead of a monarch, they elected 2 consuls for just 1 year. They commanded the armies and, crucially, could actively veto each other to stop any tyrannical moves. Then you had the Senate, which was a group of elite, lifelong advisors who controlled state finances and foreign policy. And finally, the assemblies, where Roman citizens could actually elect those magistrates and vote on laws. Honestly, it was a brilliantly sophisticated system of checks and balances that worked beautifully, right up until it didn't.
Part 3. Conquering the Mediterranean.
With a stable government finally in place, Rome's citizen soldier armies went on a relentless, almost non-stop campaign of expansion. Early Rome didn't stay small for long. Over the next couple of centuries, they completely swallowed up the Italian peninsula, subduing neighbors like the Latins, the Samnites, and the Celts. But this aggressive outward expansion meant they were no longer just some local heavyweight. Securing Italy put Rome on a direct, unavoidable collision course with the other great Mediterranean superpower of the time, Carthage, located just across the sea in North Africa. And this intense rivalry sparked the legendary Punic Wars.
80,000. That is the staggering, almost unbelievable number of Roman soldiers wiped out in a single day at the Battle of Cannae in 216 BCE. During the Second Punic War, the brilliant Carthaginian general Hannibal famously crossed the Alps and brought the fight directly to Italy. Despite Rome having a massive numerical advantage, they were lured right into a trap. Hannibal used his heavier cavalry to completely envelop and annihilate the Roman infantry. Losing 80,000 men and 80 senators in one afternoon made this literally the worst military defeat in Roman history. And yet Rome stubbornly bounced back. They just refused to surrender. Instead, they adapted, eventually pushing the war all the way to North Africa. There, the Roman general Scipio Africanus finally defeated Hannibal at the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE. In victory, Rome was ruthless. They demanded a crushing war indemnity, 10,000 talents of silver, paid out over 50 years. On top of that, Carthage was stripped of its war elephants, almost its entire fleet, and all its overseas territories. Rome's greatest rival was reduced to a minor power, leaving Rome as the undisputed master of the Western Mediterranean. Part 4. The Republic cracks.
But here's the catch. This incredible success came at a steep internal cost.
By 146 BCE, Rome had completely destroyed Carthage and absorbed Greece. Suddenly, they controlled a vast, globe-spanning territory. But imagine trying to run a massive, complex superpower using the constitutional rules of a tiny farming village. That was Rome's fundamental scaling problem. The old ideals of citizen farmers fighting brief seasonal wars for their homeland? Completely gone. The massive influx of wealth and enslaved people from these conquests totally bypassed the common plebeians, creating a huge wealth gap. Small family farms were swallowed up by massive estates. And worst of all, the military shifted. It became a force of professional soldiers who relied on their mega-rich, ambitious generals for their retirement land, meaning they were now fiercely loyal to their commanders, not the Roman state.
Because of all this, the Republic was quite literally tearing itself apart from the inside. Italian allies actually rebelled in the Social War just to fight for basic citizenship rights. Massive slave rebellions, most famously led by Spartacus, swept across the countryside. There was a total breakdown of democratic norms. Politicians started using street violence and shady conspiracies to get their way. And most dangerously of all, we see the rise of the warlords. Generals like Sulla were literally marching their own loyal Roman armies into the city of Rome itself to seize power. That careful system of checks and balances we talked about, it was completely falling apart.
Part 5. Caesar and Civil War.
This chaotic instability and the new reliance on warlords paved the way for a dangerous new era. In 60 BCE, three incredibly powerful men formed an uneasy, off-the-books political alliance known as the First Triumvirate. You had Pompey, a massively successful general, Crassus, literally the richest man in Rome, and a brilliantly ambitious up-and-coming general named Julius Caesar. Together, they effectively hijacked the government. But in 53 BCE, Crassus was killed in battle, completely destabilizing the alliance. Pompey grew intensely jealous of Caesar's rising military fame in Gaul and aligned himself with a fearful Senate. By 49 BCE, the Senate demanded that Caesar lay down his command and return to Rome as a private citizen. Backed into a corner, Caesar was forced to make a world-changing choice. Defying the Senate's explicit orders, Caesar did the unthinkable. In 49 BCE, he crossed the Rubicon River with his veteran army. Now, the Rubicon was the strict legal boundary of Roman Italy. Bringing an army past it was a direct act of treason. There was no turning back. Rather than giving up his command and facing certain political ruin or a rigged trial, Caesar famously chose to ignite a civil war. That one man's decision engulfed the entire known world in war. Caesar moved with such lightning speed that Pompey and the Senate actually had to flee Rome for Greece. Caesar relentlessly chased them down across the map. The conflict spanned from Spain in the west to the decisive Battle of Pharsalus in Greece and all the way to Egypt in the east, where Pompey was ultimately murdered. Caesar won the civil war. With Pompey dead and order somewhat restored, Caesar sought absolute, undisputed control. He had himself appointed dictator for life, effectively overriding all of the Republic's traditional checks and balances. He packed the Senate with his own loyalists and took over the appointment of magistrates. And while he did pass some popular reforms, his absolute dictatorial control totally terrified the traditional senatorial elites. They thought they were looking at another king. This terror led directly to his brutal assassination on the 15th of March, the famous Ides of March, in 44 BCE.
Part 6. The First Emperor.
But killing the dictator did not save the Republic. It just kicked off another brutal, exhausting round of civil wars. First, Caesar's adopted heir, Octavian, teamed up with Mark Antony to hunt down and defeat Caesar's assassins in 42 BCE. But as history constantly shows us, power sharing rarely works out. Octavian and Antony eventually turned on each other. This all culminated in 31 BCE, at the Battle of Actium, where Octavian decisively defeated the combined naval forces of Mark Antony and Cleopatra. Emerging completely victorious from the ashes of the shattered Republic, Octavian consolidated absolute power. In 27 BCE, the Senate granted him a brand new title, Augustus.
Augustus was smart. He learned from Julius Caesar's fatal mistake. He knew the Romans still deeply culturally hated the word king and the open flaunting of absolute power. So he didn't call himself a dictator. Instead, he took the title princeps, which just means first citizen. He kept the Senate meeting, he kept the consuls, and he kept the elections going, meticulously maintaining the comforting illusion that the Republic was still alive and well. But in reality, he personally controlled the armies, the state finances, and the laws. It was, as this quote beautifully points out, a monarchy in disguise. The Roman Republic was over, and the Roman Empire had officially begun.
So the Republic was officially dead, replaced by a system that finally brought an end to decades of bloody civil war. But it leaves us with a huge question. Could one man truly hold this staggering globe-spanning territory together? Thank you for joining me for this explainer. Next time, we'll explore exactly how Augustus and the emperors who followed him managed to turn this fractured, messy monarchy in disguise into a stable and incredibly powerful empire.